The sound of angry voices echoed through the dusty streets of Empire City, Colorado, as Hannah Miller clutched her swollen belly, her face contorted with pain as another contraction ripped through her body. $200 for this fine breeding stock, the auctioneer called out, yanking on the chain connected to the iron collar around her neck, forcing her to stand straighter despite the agony threatening to bring her to her knees. It was 1872, and Hannah had never imagined her life would come to this. 23 years old, 9 months pregnant, and being sold like cattle in a frontier town after her husband died of typhoid fever, leaving her with nothing but debts to a ruthless creditor. The baby kicked inside her, as if protesting the indignity of their situation. Look at her, gentlemen, young and healthy. Think of the children she'll bear for you, the auctioneer continued, ignoring the sweat beading on Hannah's pale forehead and the way she bit her lip to keep from crying out. From the back of the crowd, Kieran Young watched with growing disgust. At 30 years old, the cowboy had seen his share of ugliness on the frontier, but the sight of a pregnant woman being auctioned off while clearly in labor made his blood boil. He'd come to town to sell some horses and restock supplies before heading back to his small ranch, not to witness such barbarity. $250. Do I hear $250 for this fine specimen? The auctioneer called, his voice carrying across the town square where a crowd of men had gathered, some leering, others merely curious. Hannah's knees buckled as another contraction hit, stronger than the last. Please, she whispered, though no one seemed to care. My baby's coming. $250 from Mr. Davidson. The auctioneer pointed to a heavy-set man with a cruel twist to his mouth. Davidson owned the saloon and brothel at the edge of town, and his intentions for Hannah were clear in his predatory gaze. Kieran had heard enough. He pushed his way through the crowd, hand moving to the pouch of money he'd earned from selling his horses. It was meant to buy new breeding stock, seed for planting, and supplies to last through winter. Everything he'd worked for over 5 hard years of building his ranch from nothing. $500, Kieran called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $500 from the cowboy. Do I hear $550? Davidson scowled. $550. Hannah's eyes, glazed with pain, found Kieran's. There was something in them, not hope. She was too far gone for that, but a flicker of something that pierced his heart. $600, Kieran countered, his hand tightening around his money pouch. The bidding continued, each increase eating away at everything Kieran had built. When it reached $800, Davidson hesitated, then shook his head, stepping back with a muttered curse. $800 going once, twice. Sold to the cowboy. The auctioneer banged his gavel as Hannah let out a cry, doubling over. Kieran rushed forward, catching her before she fell. I've got you, madam, he said softly, reaching for the key to her collar that the auctioneer dangled before him. Your property, cowboy. Hope she was worth emptying your pockets. The auctioneer laughed, dropping the key and papers into Kieran's outstretched hand. Kieran unlocked the iron collar, tossing it aside with disgust. What's your name? He asked gently as he supported her weight. Hannah, she gasped. Hannah Miller. My baby. I know. We need to get you somewhere safe. Kieran looked around desperately. The hotel would cost money he no longer had. The doctor's office was across town. My wagon's just behind the general store, he said, lifting her carefully into his arms. I've got blankets there. Can you hold on a little longer? She nodded weakly, her fingers clutching his shirt as another contraction hit. Why? She managed to ask between ragged breaths. Why did you? Questions later, Kieran replied, striding quickly through the parting crowd, ignoring the whispers and stares. Right now, you've got more important things to worry about. Hannah's labor progressed rapidly once they reached Kieran's wagon. He made her as comfortable as possible among the supplies he'd purchased, using his bedroll as cushioning. "I'm going to get the doctor," he said, but Hannah grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "No time," she gasped. "The baby's coming now." Kieran had delivered foals and calves, but never a human baby. Still, the principles couldn't be too different. "All right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "I'm here. You're not alone." Under the late afternoon sun, in the back of a wagon behind the Empire City General Store, Hannah Miller brought her child into the world with the help of a stranger who had spent everything he had to save her. "It's a boy," Kieran announced, wrapping the squalling infant in his cleanest shirt. "A strong, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Hannah's face as she reached for her son. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Kieran with exhausted wonder. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Kieran smiled, something warm spreading through his chest as he watched mother and child together. "No need. Some things are worth more than money." As the sun set over Empire City, Kieran knew his life had changed irrevocably. His plans for the future had vanished with his savings, but watching Hannah cradle her newborn son, he couldn't bring himself to regret a single dollar. "What will you call him?" he asked softly. Hannah looked down at her son, then back at the man who had sacrificed everything for two strangers. "Matthew," she decided. "It means gift from God." She hesitated. "And if it's all right with you, Kieran for his middle name." Kieran's throat tightened. "I'd be honored," he said, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them all to protect the two lives now entrusted to him. The journey back to Kieran's ranch was slow and careful. Hannah, still weak from childbirth, sat beside him on the wagon bench, baby Matthew nestled in a makeshift sling across her chest. They left Empire City 2 days after the birth, once Hannah was strong enough to travel. "You didn't tell me where we're going," Hannah said as the town disappeared behind them. "I've got a small place about 20 miles east," Kieran replied, keeping the horses at a gentle pace. "Nothing fancy, just a cabin, a barn, and about 50 acres. Been working it for 5 years now." Hannah studied his profile. In the rush of events, she hadn't really looked at him. He had kind eyes, she decided, deep blue and thoughtful, set in a sun-weathered face. His hands were calloused but gentle, as she'd discovered during her labor. "You spent all your money on us," she said softly. "Why would you do that for strangers?" Kieran was silent for a long moment. "I couldn't watch what was happening and do nothing," he finally said. "No decent man could." "There seemed to be plenty of men in that square who could," Hannah countered, bitterness edging her voice. "I didn't say there were many decent men in Empire City," Kieran replied with a faint smile. "But seriously, Miss Miller—" "Hannah, please." "Hannah, then. I did what anyone should have done. Nothing heroic about it." She shook her head. "You gave everything you had. I saw your face when you counted out that money. It was everything." Kieran shrugged uncomfortably. "Money can be earned again. Lives can't." They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon and the horses' steady footfalls the only sounds besides Matthew's occasional soft noises. "What will you do now?" Hannah asked eventually. "I've cost you your plans for the ranch." "We'll manage," Kieran said with more confidence than he felt. "Got some crops planted already, and 10 good horses still in the pasture. The barn needs work, but it'll stand another winter." "I'm a hard worker," Hannah offered, "and I won't be a burden. As soon as I'm strong enough, I can cook, clean, garden, whatever you need. At least until I can earn enough to make my own way." Kieran glanced at her. "You don't owe me anything, Hannah. You and Matthew are welcome to stay as long as you need. No conditions." Hannah fell silent, overwhelmed by his generosity. Her marriage to Thomas Miller had been brief and difficult. He'd been nearly twice her age, a shopkeeper who'd taken her in after her parents died in a fire that destroyed their farm. The marriage had been one of convenience rather than love, but she'd been grateful until Thomas's gambling debts mounted and his temper worsened. When he died of typhoid 3 months ago, she'd discovered he'd mortgaged everything to a man named Harmon Black. With no way to pay the debt and no family to turn to, Hannah had found herself at Black's mercy, which was non-existent. He'd decided to recoup his losses by selling her to the highest bidder. Now, looking at Kieran Young's profile against the setting sun, Hannah wondered if perhaps there was such a thing as divine intervention after all. "There it is," Kieran said some hours later, pointing ahead to where a small cabin stood in a clearing, with a larger barn nearby and fields stretching beyond. Home sweet home. It was humble, Hannah thought, but there was something appealing about its sturdy simplicity. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, which surprised her. "You have someone looking after the place?" she asked. "My ranch hand, Eli. Good man, works hard. He's getting on in years, but he knows more about ranching than I ever will." Kieran guided the wagon toward the cabin. "He'll have kept the fire going, knowing I was due back today." Sure enough, as they approached, an elderly man with a silver beard emerged from the cabin, raising a hand in greeting. His bushy eyebrows rose at the sight of Hannah and the baby. "Brought company, I see," he called as Kieran halted the wagon. "Eli, this is Hannah Miller and her son, Matthew," Kieran said, jumping down and coming around to help Hannah. "They'll be staying with us." If Eli was surprised, he hid it well. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "little one, welcome to the Triple Y. Let me help you get settled." Between the two men, Hannah and Matthew were soon installed in Kieran's bedroom, while he moved his things to the small loft above the main room. The cabin was modest, just 2 rooms plus the loft, but clean and well-maintained. "I'm putting you out of your bed," Hannah protested. "Nonsense. You need proper rest more than I do," Kieran insisted. "Eli's made some stew. You should eat, then get some sleep." That night, after feeding Matthew and placing him in the wooden crate Eli had quickly converted into a cradle, Hannah lay in Kieran's bed, inhaling the unfamiliar scent of him on the pillow's leather, soap, and something distinctly male that was oddly comforting. For the first time in months, she felt safe. In the main room, Kieran sat at his table with Eli, speaking in low tones. "You spent all the horse money on them?" Eli asked, incredulous. Kieran nodded, sipping the whiskey Eli had poured. "Couldn't see another way. Your breeding plans will wait. We'll make do with what we have." Eli studied him thoughtfully. "She's pretty. That's not why I did it. Didn't say it was." Eli's weathered face cracked into a smile. "But it doesn't hurt, does it?" Kieran ignored the comment. "We need to stretch what supplies we have. The root cellar's full at least, and the garden's doing well. If we're careful, we'll make it through winter." "Always do," Eli said with the quiet confidence of a man who'd survived many frontier winters. "And now we've got another pair of hands. Once she's recovered." "She's not here to work, Eli. Everyone works on a ranch, son. You know that. And I wager she's not the type to sit idle." Eli rose, his joints creaking. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow comes early." After the old man retired to his small room off the kitchen, Kieran sat alone, contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. He hadn't planned on rescuing a woman and her newborn, hadn't planned on sharing his small home with them, but something about Hannah Miller had called to him, even before he'd seen her face clearly through that auction crowd. Maybe it was her dignity despite the humiliation. Maybe it was the protective instinct awakened by her vulnerable condition. Whatever it was, Kieran knew he couldn't regret his decision, even if it meant struggling through the coming year. With a final glance at his bedroom door, now closed with Hannah and Matthew sleeping behind it, Kieran climbed the ladder to the loft and settled on his bedroll, listening to the familiar sounds of his home, now changed forever by the presence of its new inhabitants. Days stretched into weeks as autumn deepened toward winter. Hannah recovered quickly from childbirth, determined not to be the burden she feared. By the end of her first week at the Triple Y, she had taken over the cooking and begun putting the cabin in better order, much to Eli's delight. "Been telling that boy for years he needs a woman's touch around here," the old man confided to Hannah as they worked together in the small garden, harvesting the last vegetables before frost. Place was functional, but not what you'd call homey. Hannah laughed. "Kieran strikes me as a practical man." "That he is. Practical to a fault sometimes." Eli straightened, rubbing his back. "Been trying to convince him to add on to the cabin for 2 years. Needs more space if he's ever going to," he broke off, glancing at Hannah. "Well, if the ranch is going to grow." Hannah pretended not to notice his slip. She knew what he'd been about to say if Kieran was ever going to have a family. The thought sent an unexpected warmth through her that she quickly suppressed. She was in no position to be thinking of such things, and certainly not with the man who had saved her out of kindness, not interest. Kieran himself remained somewhat reserved, though unfailingly considerate. He worked from dawn until dusk, tending to the horses, repairing fences, and preparing the ranch for winter. Hannah often watched him from the cabin window, admiring his strong, sure movements and the gentle way he handled the animals. One evening, about a month after their arrival, Hannah put Matthew down in his cradle, a proper one now, which Kieran had built in his spare moments, and found Kieran alone at the table, studying a worn ledger by lamplight. "Is something wrong?" she asked, noticing the furrow between his brows. He looked up, quickly closing the book. "Just going over the numbers." Hannah sat across from him. "And they don't add up the way you'd like." A smile touched his lips. "That obvious? You've been concerned for days." Hannah folded her hands on the table. "Kieran, I know you spent everything on us. If you need me to leave—" "No," he said quickly, too quickly perhaps. "That's not what I want." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, something neither was ready to name. Kieran cleared his throat. "Truth is, I was counting on those new breeding horses. Without them, we'll have fewer foals in the spring, which means less income next year. But we'll manage. What if you could get a loan from the bank in Empire City?" Hannah suggested. Kieran shook his head. "Banks don't much like lending to small ranchers, especially with nothing to put up as collateral. Everything I have is already invested in this place." Hannah bit her lip, thinking. "I can sew," she said finally. "I made all my own clothes, and I used to take in mending for extra money before." She trailed off, not wanting to mention her marriage. "You want to sew for folks in town?" Kieran asked. "Why not? Eli mentioned there's no seamstress in the area. People must need clothing mended, altered, or made." She leaned forward earnestly. "Let me contribute, Kieran. Let me help fix what my presence here has complicated." Kieran studied her face in the lamplight, her determined green eyes, the way her brown hair, free from its usual bun, fell in waves around her shoulders. In the weeks she'd been at the ranch, color had returned to her cheeks and a quiet strength to her bearing. "You don't have to earn your keep, Hannah. I told you, you and Matthew are welcome here. No conditions." "It's not about earning my keep," she insisted. "It's about being useful, about contributing. Surely you can understand that." He could. Independence and self-sufficiency were values he'd lived by his entire life. "All right," he said finally. "Next time I go into town, we'll spread the word about your sewing skills." Hannah beamed at him, and Kieran felt something shift inside him, like a piece of himself settling into place he hadn't known was adrift. The first snow fell in early November, dusting the Triple Y in white. Hannah stood at the doorway with Matthew bundled in her arms, watching the flakes drift down. "First snow is always the prettiest," Kieran said, coming to stand beside her. "Before you get tired of shoveling paths and breaking ice on the water troughs." "I've always loved it," Hannah replied. "Everything looks clean and new, like the world's been given a fresh start." Kieran glanced at her. "Is that what you want? A fresh start? Isn't that what you've given us?" She turned to face him, Matthew cooing softly between them. "I never thanked you properly, did I? Not just for the auction, but for all of this taking us in, making a place for us." "You've thanked me plenty with your cooking alone," he said lightly, but his eyes were serious. "Hannah, Kieran, need you in the barn." Eli's voice called out, interrupting whatever he'd been about to say. "Mare's having trouble with her leg again." Kieran sighed. "Duty calls. We'll talk later." Hannah nodded, watching him stride through the snow toward the barn. Whatever moment had been building between them was gone, and she wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. Later that evening, after everyone else was asleep, Hannah sat by the fire working on a dress commission for Mrs. Porter, the general store owner's wife. Word of her sewing skills had spread quickly, and she now had a steady stream of work, the income from which she insisted on contributing to the ranch's expenses despite Kieran's initial protests. The sound of the ladder creaking drew her attention. Kieran descended from the loft, dressed in a flannel shirt and worn trousers. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly, mindful of Matthew sleeping nearby and Eli in his room. Saw the light still burning. He settled into the chair opposite hers. "You should rest. You work too hard," says the man who never stops moving from sunup to sundown, she countered with a smile. "Fair point." He watched her nimble fingers work the fabric. "You're good at that. My mother taught me. She said a woman should always have a skill that's hers alone." Hannah's voice softened with memory. She was right. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the soft swish of fabric. "What happened to your husband?" Kieran asked suddenly, then immediately looked contrite. "I'm sorry. That's none of my business." Hannah set her sewing aside. "No, it's all right. You should know, considering all you've done for me." She took a deep breath. "Thomas was a shopkeeper in Denver. He married me after my parents died when I was 18. It wasn't a love match, more an arrangement of convenience. He needed someone to keep house and help in the store. I needed somewhere to go." "Was he cruel to you?" Kieran's voice had an edge to it. "Not physically, no. But he was cold, distant. And he gambled." Hannah shook her head. "I didn't know how bad it was until he fell ill with typhoid. By then, he'd mortgaged everything to Harmon Black, a businessman with questionable ethics. When Thomas died, Black called in the debts immediately. And with no way to pay, I became the payment." Hannah's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "Black decided I was worth more as merchandise than as a shopkeeper's widow, especially in my condition." Kieran's jaw tightened. "The baby's father was your husband?" "Yes. Thomas wasn't interested in intimacy for most of our marriage. But near the end, when his gambling debts were worst, he decided an heir might help him secure a loan from his brother." Hannah's face flushed with the admission. "It worked, but the money went straight to the tables. When I told Black I was with child, he just laughed and said it added to my value." "I'm sorry," Kieran said, his voice rough with anger. "No one should be treated that way." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes bright in the firelight. "Why are you alone here, Kieran? A man like you, kind, hardworking, surely you could have had your pick of women." It was Kieran's turn to look uncomfortable. "Never seemed to be the right time," he said. "Building the ranch took all my attention. And before that." He trailed off, and Hannah waited, sensing there was more. I was engaged once, he finally continued, back in St. Louis before I came west. Her name was Charlotte. We were young. I was 22, she was 20. Her father owned the livery where I worked. What happened? Cholera outbreak. It swept through the city like wildfire. Charlotte, her parents, her little brother all gone in less than a week. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Hannah could see the old pain in his eyes. After the funerals, there was nothing keeping me there. I headed west with what little I had and eventually found this place. I'm sorry, Hannah said softly, unconsciously echoing his earlier words. Kieran shrugged. It was 8 years ago now. Life goes on. He stood, moving to stoke the fire. Anyway, that's why there's just me, Eli, and now you and Matthew. Hannah studied his back as he prodded the embers. There was strength there, but also a solitary quality that tugged at her heart. Thank you for telling me, she said. He turned, offering a small smile. Seems only fair, since you shared your story. He glanced at Matthew's cradle. He's a good baby, hardly ever cries. He knows he's safe, Hannah said, following his gaze. Children sense these things. I hope so. Kieran's voice was soft. I want him to always feel safe here. The words hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Hannah felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. I should let you get back to your sewing, Kieran said, breaking the moment. Morning comes early. Good night, Kieran, Hannah said, picking up her work again. He paused at the ladder. Good night, Hannah. As he disappeared into the loft, Hannah's hands stilled on the fabric. For the first time since Thomas's death, no, if she was honest with herself, for the first time ever she felt the stirring of genuine affection for a man. It both thrilled and terrified her. Winter settled fully over the Colorado territory, blanketing the Triple Y Ranch in snow and confining its inhabitants largely to the cabin. Christmas approached, bringing with it a festive spirit despite their modest circumstances. One afternoon, Kieran and Eli returned from checking the horses with a small pine tree in tow. What's this? Hannah asked, laughing as they struggled to stand it in a bucket of rocks. Can't have Christmas without a tree, Eli declared. Tradition at the Triple Y. Isn't that right, boss? Kieran looked sheepish. Well, we've never actually had one before, but it seemed like a good year to start. Hannah's heart swelled at the gesture. It's perfect, she said, Matthew on her hip as she surveyed the little tree. I have some red ribbon from my sewing we could use. That evening, they decorated the tree with ribbon, pine cones dipped in flour paste to look snow-covered, and a star Kieran had fashioned from scrap tin. It was simple but beautiful, especially to Hannah, who hadn't celebrated Christmas properly since her parents died. I have something for you, Kieran said later, when Eli had retired and Matthew was asleep. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, carved wooden horse. For Matthew's first Christmas. It's not much, but it's wonderful, Hannah interrupted, taking the figure and running her fingers over the detailed craftsmanship. Did you make this? Kieran nodded, looking pleased at her reaction. Been working on it in the evenings. I have something for you too, Hannah said, suddenly shy. She went to her sewing basket and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. It isn't much either. Kieran unwrapped it carefully to find a new shirt, made from sturdy blue cotton with neat, even stitches. Hannah, this is too much. You should be selling this, not giving it away. It's not giving away if it's a gift, she insisted. Your other shirts are practically threadbare. Besides, I used some fabric Mrs. Porter gave me in trade for altering her dresses, so it hardly cost anything. Kieran ran his fingers over the material. No one's made me clothing since my mother died, he said quietly. Thank you. Their eyes met, and Hannah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. 3 months had passed since he'd bought her at that auction. 3 months of living under the same roof, sharing meals, watching Matthew grow. Somewhere in that time, gratitude and friendship had become something deeper, though neither had spoken of it. "I have something for Eli, too," she said, breaking the charged moment. "A new scarf. His old one is more holes than yarn." Kieran smiled. "He'll pretend to grumble about it, but he'll wear it every day." "I know." Hannah returned his smile, comfortable in their shared understanding of the old man who had become like family. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the windows. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth and an unspoken tenderness that grew stronger each day. Christmas Day dawned bright and cold. After a breakfast of special biscuits Hannah had been saving flour to make, they exchanged their simple gifts. Eli, as predicted, grumbled about not needing coddling, before promptly wrapping the new scarf around his neck and refusing to remove it even indoors. For Hannah, Eli had carved a beautiful hairbrush with an intricate pattern of flowers on the back. "A lady should have pretty things," he mumbled when she hugged him in thanks. The day passed in pleasant domesticity, with a dinner of rabbit stew and the last of the preserved vegetables from the garden. As evening fell, Eli announced he was turning in early, winking obviously at Kieran as he retired to his room. "Subtle, isn't he?" Hannah laughed, sitting by the fire with Matthew asleep in her arms. "About as subtle as a stampede," Kieran agreed, joining her. He watched her rock the baby gently. "He's growing so fast." "I know. 2 months old already." Hannah smiled down at her son. "Sometimes I can hardly believe all that's happened." "Do you regret any of it?" Kieran asked softly. She looked up, surprised. "Regret? Being saved from a life of servitude or worse? Having a safe home for my son? Meeting you?" She shook her head emphatically. "Not for a single moment. Even though you're stuck out here, miles from anywhere, with limited prospects?" Hannah studied him. "Is that how you see it? Being stuck?" "No," Kieran said quickly. "That came out wrong. I just meant your life could have been different. Easier perhaps. In a town with more people, more opportunities. More opportunities to be looked down upon as a widow with a child and no means of support," Hannah countered. "The frontier isn't kind to women alone, Kieran. You know that. You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice low and intense. The words hung between them, laden with meaning. Hannah felt her pulse quicken. "No," she agreed softly. "I'm not." Kieran reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "Hannah, I need to say something, and I hope it won't make you uncomfortable." She held her breath, waiting. "These past months, having you and Matthew here, it's changed everything. The ranch feels like a home now, not just a place I work." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I know you came here through circumstances neither of us planned, but I can't imagine the triple Y without you anymore." "Kieran, please let me finish. I'm not asking for anything. I know you've been through a difficult time, and the last thing you need is pressure from me. But I wanted you to know that when you think about your future, I hope you'll consider making it here. With me." Hannah looked down at Matthew, then back at Kieran. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying I care for you, Hannah. More than I expected to, more than I thought I could after Charlotte. And I care for Matthew as if he were my own." Kieran's eyes were steady on hers. "I'm not asking for an answer now. Just think about it." Hannah was silent for a long moment, processing his words. Finally, she spoke. "I've never been in love before," she admitted. "Not with Thomas, certainly. I didn't know what it felt like until..." She stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "Until..." Kieran prompted, hope kindling in his eyes. Until I saw you standing in that auction crowd, looking so angry on my behalf. Until you delivered my son with such gentle hands. Until I watched you build him a cradle and carve him toys. Hannah's voice strengthened. I don't need to think about my future, Kieran. I already know I wanted to be here. With you. Kieran's face transformed with a smile that took her breath away. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, then pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Matthew still sleeping peacefully between them, Kieran rested his forehead against Hannah's. "Merry Christmas," he murmured. "The best Christmas," she replied softly. "The first of many." As winter gave way to spring, life at the Triple Y settled into a new rhythm. Hannah and Kieran moved carefully in their relationship, taking time to know each other better despite already living under the same roof. Their first kiss on Christmas night had been followed by many others, but always with restraint, both aware of Eli's presence and their own desire to build something lasting rather than rush headlong into physical intimacy. For Hannah, who had never experienced true affection in her marriage to Thomas, Kieran's patient courtship was a revelation. He brought her wildflowers when they first appeared in the meadow, listened attentively when she spoke, and treated her opinions with respect. Most importantly, he showed genuine love for Matthew, spending time with the baby each evening, talking and playing with him as naturally as if he were his own son. By April, as the snow melted and green began to reclaim the land, Hannah's sewing business was flourishing. Word had spread beyond Empire City, bringing customers from neighboring settlements willing to pay good prices for her skilled work. The income helped ease the ranch's financial strain, allowing Kieran to purchase 2 new breeding mares at a reasonable price from a rancher moving east. "You've saved the Triple Y," Kieran told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Matthew, now 6 months old, was already asleep inside. "We saved it together," Hannah corrected him. "That's what partners do." Kieran took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Is that what we are? Partners, aren't we?" She turned to look at him, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "I was hoping for something more official." Kieran's voice was casual, but Hannah felt his hand tighten slightly around hers. Her heart skipped. "Official?" Instead of answering directly, Kieran reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out to her. It was a ring, simple but beautiful, a slender silver band with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing of hers I kept when I came west." Hannah stared at the ring, then at Kieran's face, her eyes wide. "Hannah Miller," he said formally, though she could hear the nervous edge in his voice. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise to love and cherish you and Matthew for all my days, to work beside you as your partner in all things, and to build a life worthy of the trust you've placed in me." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Kieran, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. Then he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been carefully banked until now. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hannah laughed softly. "I think Eli's going to be very smug about this. He's been dropping hints for weeks." "Eli's been dropping hints since the day you arrived," Kieran corrected with a chuckle. "The old matchmaker pretends to be gruff, but he's been pushing us together from the start." "He was right," Hannah acknowledged, leaning her head on Kieran's shoulder. "We belong together." "We do," Kieran agreed, holding her close as the last rays of sun gilded the land that was now truly their home. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. The weather cooperated beautifully, providing a warm spring day perfect for the outdoor gathering. Reverend Thomas from Empire City performed the service, with Eli standing as Kieran's best man and Mrs. Porter holding Matthew while serving as Hannah's matron of honor. A dozen or so neighbors and friends from town attended, bringing food and good wishes for the couple. Hannah wore a dress she'd made herself, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the bodice and hem. Kieran, looking unusually formal in a new shirt and his best trousers, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him across the yard, wildflowers in her hair and Matthew's cradle positioned nearby so he could be part of the ceremony. The vows were traditional but heartfelt, both Hannah and Kieran speaking clearly and with conviction as they pledged their lives to each other. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers, none louder than Eli's weathered voice calling "About time." The celebration continued into the evening, with fiddle music provided by one of the neighboring ranchers and plenty of food spread on tables outside the cabin. As darkness fell and guests began to depart, Eli made an announcement of his own. "Figured you newlyweds might want some privacy," he said, slapping Kieran on the back. "So I'm bunking in the barn for a few days." "Eli, that's not necessary," Hannah began, but the old man waved her off. "Course it is. Besides, got a new foal needs watching. 2 birds, 1 stone." He winked at Kieran. "Don't worry about morning chores tomorrow. I'll handle 'em." With that, he gathered his bedroll and headed for the barn, leaving the newlyweds standing somewhat awkwardly in their own yard. "He's not subtle, but his heart's in the right place," Kieran said, taking Hannah's hand. "Are you ready to go in? It's been a long day." Hannah nodded, suddenly shy despite the months they'd lived under the same roof. This was different. They were husband and wife now, and the night ahead held new intimacies. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Someone Mrs. Porter, Hannah guessed, had scattered more wildflowers around the room and turned down the bed, which now boasted a new quilt, a wedding gift from several of the women in town. "It's beautiful," Hannah murmured, taking in the thoughtful touches. Kieran checked on Matthew, who was sleeping soundly in his cradle, then came to stand behind Hannah, his hands gently resting on her shoulders. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. She turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be." He bent to kiss her, and this time there was no restraint, no holding back. The kiss deepened, hands began to wander, and soon they were moving toward the bed that would finally be theirs to share. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Hannah's head on Kieran's chest and his arms wrapped securely around her, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. From the despair of that auction block to this moment of complete contentment, it seemed almost impossible. "What are you thinking?" Kieran asked, his voice a rumble against her ear. "I'm thinking about fate," she replied, "about how the worst day of my life led to the best." He tightened his arms around her. "I thank God every day that I was in Empire City that afternoon." "So do I." She pressed a kiss to his chest. "I love you, Kieran Young." "And I love you, Hannah Young." He savored the sound of her new name, now and always. As spring blossomed into summer, the triple Y flourished. The 2 new Maras proved to be excellent additions, promising fine foals the following year. Hannah's sewing business continued to grow, and she began to teach some of the local women her techniques, creating a small community of skilled seamstresses who shared patterns and ideas. Matthew thrived under the loving attention of not just his mother, but also Kieran, who had seamlessly stepped into the role of father, and Eli, who had appointed himself honorary grandfather. By his first birthday in October, the boy was crawling everywhere, pulling himself up on furniture, and attempting his first words, "Ma" for Hannah and, to Kieran's immeasurable pride, "Pa" for him. The celebration of Matthew's birthday was a joyful affair. With a small cake, Hannah had saved sugar to bake and presents from both parents and Eli. As they watched the boy gleefully smash his cake, Kieran slipped an arm around Hannah's waist. "Hard to believe it's been a year," he said. "A year since you delivered him in the back of your wagon." Hannah agreed, leaning into his embrace. "The bravest thing anyone's ever done for me." "Second bravest," Kieran corrected. "The bravest was marrying you." She poked him in the ribs, making him laugh. "Are you saying I'm difficult, Mr. Young?" "I'm saying you're worth every moment, Mrs. Young." He kissed her temple, then grew more serious. "Hannah, there's something I want to talk to you about." Something in his tone made her look up at him. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong." He glanced at Eli, who was entertaining Matthew by making animal sounds. "Let's step outside for a moment." Concerned, Hannah followed him onto the porch. The October evening was cool but pleasant, with stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Kieran, you're worrying me." "Sorry, I don't mean to." He took her hands in his. "It's good news, actually. At least, I hope you'll think so." "What is it?" "I've been saving from the horse sales and adding it to what you've earned from sewing." He paused. "We have enough to add onto the cabin now. A proper bedroom for Matthew as he gets older, and maybe another room for the future." Hannah's brow furrowed. "Another room? For what? For who, actually?" Kieran's eyes held hers steadily. "Hannah, I know we haven't talked about this, but I've been thinking, Matthew shouldn't grow up alone. I'd like us to have more children. A brother or sister for him. A bigger family." Hannah's eyes widened, then filled with tears. She'd been keeping a secret of her own for nearly 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment to share it. "Hannah, I'm sorry if this is too soon, or if you don't want Kieran," she interrupted, placing a finger over his lips. "I'm pregnant." It was his turn to look stunned. We're going to have a baby?" she confirmed, a radiant smile breaking through her tears. "In late spring, the doctor thinks." Kieran let out a whoop of joy that startled a nearby horse, then lifted Hannah off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently back down. "A baby! Our baby! Our baby!" she echoed, laughing at his exuberance. "So yes, I think an addition to the cabin is an excellent idea." The door opened behind them, and Eli appeared with Matthew in his arms. "What's all the commotion out here? You're scaring the chickens." Kieran turned to the old man, his face split in a grin. "Eli, we're having a baby." Eli's weathered face creased in a smile. "Well now, ain't that something?" He bounced Matthew on his hip. "Hear that, young fella? You're gonna be a big brother." Looking back at the couple, he added gruffly, "'Bout time this place had more young uns running around. Getting too quiet." Hannah laughed. "I have a feeling it won't be quiet for much longer." As winter settled over the Triple Y once more, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as Kieran and neighbors from nearby ranches worked to complete the cabin addition before the worst weather hit. By Christmas, the new rooms were enclosed, if not entirely finished inside, and Hannah was showing the first gentle curve of her pregnancy. It was another Christmas of simple pleasures and handmade gifts, but richer somehow than the previous year. Matthew, now 14 months old and walking unsteadily, delighted in the colorful wooden blocks Kieran had made for him and the soft stuffed horse Hannah had sewn. "Next Christmas, there'll be another stocking on the wall," Kieran observed as they sat by the fire after Matthew had been put to bed. Hannah, working on a tiny gown for the coming baby, smiled contentedly. "It's hard to believe how much has changed in a year." "Good changes," Eli commented from his chair, where he was whittling yet another toy for Matthew. The old man had become even more devoted to the family since the news of the new baby, taking on extra chores to allow Hannah more rest and Kieran more time to work on the cabin addition. "The best?" Kieran agreed, reaching over to take Hannah's hand. "I was thinking, When spring comes and the baby's born, we might have a proper celebration. Invite folks from town. Have a barbecue to thank everyone who helped with the cabin. That sounds wonderful, Hannah said. By then, the garden will be planted and the new foals will have arrived. A perfect time to celebrate. As they talked and planned, the snow fell softly outside, blanketing the ranch in white. Inside, warmth and love filled every corner of the cabin that had become a true home. Spring arrived in a burst of wildflowers and new life at the Triple Y. 3 new foals were born in April, healthy and strong, promising good returns when they were grown and trained. The garden Hannah had expanded thrived under her care, and the fruit trees Kieran had planted 2 years earlier showed signs of bearing for the first time. As May approached, Hannah's time grew near. The new bedroom was finished and furnished, with Matthew now sleeping in his own small bed, while a cradle, a new one Kieran had crafted with even more care than the first, waited for the baby. On a warm afternoon in mid-May, while Kieran was checking fences in the north pasture and Eli was in town for supplies, Hannah felt the first pains begin. She was in the garden, Matthew playing nearby with a wooden horse, when the contraction gripped her. "Not yet," she murmured, placing a hand on her swollen belly. "Wait for your father to get home." But the baby had other ideas. The contractions increased steadily in frequency and intensity. Hannah managed to get Matthew and herself inside before the pain became too severe to walk. "Mama hurt?" Matthew asked, his small face concerned as Hannah paused, gripping the table during a contraction. "Mama's fine, sweetheart," she assured him when she could speak again. "The baby's coming, that's all." She settled Matthew with some blocks and a cup of milk, then tried to think clearly through the pain. Kieran wouldn't be back for hours, and Eli was in town. Mrs. Thompson, the nearest neighbor, was a good mile away. "We'll be all right," she told herself firmly. "I've done this before." But last time, she remembered, she'd had Kieran's steady presence, his strong hands and calm voice. The thought of facing this alone, with only a toddler for company, was daunting. Another contraction hit, stronger than before. Hannah gasped, leaning against the wall. When it passed, she moved as quickly as she could to gather what she would need: clean cloths, the special scissors she kept sharp for her sewing, water heating on the stove. The hours passed in a blur of pain and brief respites. Hannah kept one eye on Matthew, making sure he was safe and occupied, while she prepared as best she could for the birth. The sun was slanting toward late afternoon when she heard hoofbeats approaching. "Thank God!" she breathed, relief washing through her. Moments later, the door burst open and Kieran rushed in, his face a mask of concern. "Hannah, Mrs. Thompson saw me riding back and said she thought you were in labor." He was at her side instantly, supporting her as another contraction gripped her body. "The baby's coming fast," Hannah gasped when she could speak again. "Much faster than Matthew." Kieran's worried eyes met hers. "I'll ride for the doctor." "No time," Hannah interrupted. "This baby isn't waiting. I need you here." The certainty in her voice convinced him. With an efficiency born of their previous experience and months on the ranch together, they prepared. Kieran moved Matthew to the new bedroom with toys to keep him occupied, then returned to help Hannah to their bed. "Just like last time," he said, trying to keep his voice steady as he rolled up his sleeves. "Except now you're my wife, and this is our child." Hannah managed to smile through her pain. A much better circumstance. The labor progressed rapidly from there. Kieran was as calm and capable as before, his hands gentle but sure. As the sun set over the Triple Y, their daughter entered the world with a strong cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. "She's perfect," Kieran whispered, cleaning the infant carefully before placing her in Hannah's arms. "Absolutely perfect." Hannah looked down at their daughter, taking in the wispy dark hair and tiny features. "She looks like you," she said softly. She has your eyes. Kieran sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Hannah's shoulders, the other hand gently touching his daughter's cheek. What shall we call her? They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any. Now, looking at their daughter's face, Hannah knew. Sarah, she said. It means princess. And Elizabeth for your mother. Sarah Elizabeth Young. Kieran tested the name. I like it. A small sound from the doorway drew their attention. Matthew stood there, having escaped his room, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Come meet your sister, Matthew, Hannah called softly. Kieran lifted the boy onto the bed, helping him settle carefully beside Hannah. This is Sarah, your baby sister. Matthew peered at the infant with solemn curiosity. Baby, he pronounced, reaching out a gentle finger to touch her hand. To everyone's delight, Sarah's tiny fingers closed around her brother's. She likes you, Kieran told Matthew, whose face broke into a proud smile. The sound of the front door opening announced Eli's return. Anyone home? The old man called. In here, Eli, Kieran replied. Come meet the newest member of the Triple Y. Eli appeared in the doorway, still wearing his coat from town. His eyes widened at the tableau before him. Well, I'll be, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Didn't waste any time, did she? She's impatient, like her father, Hannah said with a tired smile. Eli approached the bed cautiously, peering down at the infant. She's a beauty, he declared. Got the young look about her. Her name is Sarah Elizabeth, Kieran told him. Fine name for a fine girl. Eli nodded approvingly, then seemed to remember something. Got the supplies for the celebration next week. Folks in town are looking forward to it. His eyes twinkled. Guess we'll be celebrating one more thing than planned. The celebration, held the following weekend, was everything Hannah and Kieran had hoped for. Friends and neighbors from miles around gathered at the Triple Y, bringing food and gifts to welcome Sarah and congratulate the growing family. Tables were set up outside the cabin, laden with dishes everyone had contributed. A pair of fiddlers provided music, and children played games in the yard. Hannah, recovered well from the birth, sat in a chair on the porch with Sarah in her arms, accepting congratulations and showing off her daughter with proud smiles. Kieran moved among the guests, the consummate host, though his eyes frequently sought out his wife and new daughter. Eli, unusually sociable, regaled visitors with the tale of Sarah's birth, growing more dramatic with each telling until Hannah laughingly called out, Eli Young, you weren't even there. Details. The old man waved dismissively, to the amusement of his audience. As the afternoon wore on, Kieran climbed onto a barrel to address the gathering. Conversation quieted as people turned to listen. Hannah and I want to thank you all for coming today, he began. 1.5 years ago, I was a lonely rancher with a dream but not much else. Now, thanks to God's grace and the love of a good woman, I have a family and a home worth more than all the gold in Colorado. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Hannah blinked back tears as Kieran continued. Many of you know how Hannah and I met. Some might call it chance or coincidence that I was in Empire City that day. I call it Providence. He looked directly at Hannah now, his eyes full of emotion. I went to town to buy horses and came home with something far more valuable, the beginning of a family. He raised his glass. So today we celebrate not just a new life, though Sarah is certainly worth celebrating, but also new beginnings. The Triple Y is flourishing thanks to all of you who've helped us along the way. This is our home, and you are all welcome in it, always. Hear, hear, called several voices, and glasses were raised in toast. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, guests gradually departed, leaving behind good wishes and enough leftover food to feed the family for days. Finally, only the residents of the Triple Y remained, settling onto the porch to enjoy the peaceful evening. Matthew had fallen asleep on a blanket nearby, worn out from the excitement. Sarah dozed in Hannah's arms, her tiny face relaxed in slumber. Kieran sat beside his wife, one arm around her shoulders, the other gently stroking his daughter's dark hair. Eli sat in his usual chair, looking out over the land that had become more than just a workplace to him. "Fine day," he commented. "Fine family." "The best," Kieran agreed, kissing Hannah's temple. Hannah leaned into her husband's embrace, contentment washing over her. From the horror of that auction block to this moment of perfect peace, the journey had been unexpected but had led her exactly where she belonged. "I love you," she whispered to Kieran. "And I love you," he replied. "Forever." As twilight deepened into night, stars appeared overhead, bright and clear in the vast Colorado sky. On the Triple Y Ranch, where once there had been loneliness and uncertainty, now there was a family bound together by love, sacrifice, and the promise of a future brighter than they had ever dared to hope for. 5 years later, the autumn sun cast golden light across the Triple Y Ranch as Hannah stood on the porch, watching the scene before her with a heart full of contentment. In the yard, Kieran was teaching 6-year-old Matthew to throw a lasso, the boy's face a study in concentration as he attempted to loop the rope around a fence post. Nearby, 4-year-old Sarah sat astride her pony, a gift from Eli on her last birthday, while Kieran's ranch hand, young Tom Fletcher, led the animal in a careful circle. 2-year-old James, named for Hannah's father, toddled after the chickens, giggling with delight as they scattered before him. And in Hannah's arms, 3-month-old Rebecca slept peacefully, unaware of the bustling activity around her. "Mama, look, I did it." Matthew's triumphant voice drew Hannah's attention back to the lasso lesson. The boy had managed to loop the rope around the post, and was now looking to her for approval. "Well done, Matthew," she called back, smiling at his proud grin. Kieran ruffled his son's hair, his own face reflecting pride and love. At 35, he was in his prime, strong from years of ranch work, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had drawn Hannah to him from the beginning. The Triple Y had prospered beyond their early hopes. What had once been a struggling homestead was now a respectable ranch with a herd of quality horses known throughout the territory. The cabin had been expanded again 2 years ago, adding a proper kitchen and another bedroom for the growing family. A bunkhouse stood near the enlarged barn, housing Tom and the 2 other hands who helped with the increased workload. Hannah's sewing business had evolved as well. Rather than taking in work herself, she now managed a small cooperative of seamstresses in Empire City and the surrounding area, organizing orders and supplying patterns and materials. The arrangement allowed her to focus on her family while still contributing to their income and helping other women achieve independence through their skills. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Young," came a gruff voice beside her. Eli, now in his 70s but still spry, settled into the rocking chair Kieran had built specially to accommodate his aging joints. "Just counting my blessings," Hannah replied, shifting Rebecca gently in her arms. "There are so many." Eli nodded, his eyes following her gaze to Kieran and the children. "Never thought I'd live to see all this," he admitted. "When I signed on with that stubborn young man 8 years ago, it was just him and me and a dream that seemed too big. And now look at us," Hannah said softly, "all because he couldn't stand by and watch an injustice." Eli's weathered face creased in a smile. "Best decision he ever made, buying you that day." Hannah had long since come to terms with the circumstances of her arrival at the Triple Y. What had begun in humiliation and desperation had transformed into a life of love and purpose. The memory of that auction block no longer brought shame, only gratitude for the man who had seen her humanity when others saw only merchandise. Best decision I ever made was saying yes when he asked me to stay, she countered. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Kieran looked up from Matthew's lesson, hand moving instinctively to the gun he still wore when outside the immediate yard, a precaution from the early days that had become habit. A rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch, and Kieran relaxed as he recognized the doctor from Empire City. "Doc Harris," he called as the man rode into the yard. "What brings you out our way?" The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression, dismounted with a nod to Kieran. "Mrs. Young asked me to stop by when I was next in the area. Said she had some concerns about the baby." Hannah stood as the doctor approached the porch. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Harris. Rebecca's been fussier than the others were, and I wanted your opinion." "Always happy to check on the young brood," the doctor replied, following Hannah inside as Kieran gathered the other children to give them privacy. The examination was brief but thorough. "She's perfectly healthy, Mrs. Young," Dr. Harris concluded, packing away his stethoscope. "Some babies are simply more vocal than others. I suspect Miss Rebecca takes after her father in that regard, determined to be heard." Hannah laughed, relieved. "Thank you, doctor. Would you stay for supper? We've plenty, and I know Kieran would enjoy the company." "I'd be delighted," the doctor accepted. "It's a long ride back to town, and Mrs. Harris isn't expecting me until tomorrow." When Kieran brought the children in for the evening meal, they gathered around the large table that had replaced the original small one. Tom and the other hands ate in the bunkhouse, but Eli, as always, had his place at the family table, now with a special cushioned chair to ease his aging back. The conversation flowed easily, with Matthew eagerly recounting his success with the lasso and Sarah describing the new kittens in the barn. James, secured in his high chair, contributed occasional words and enthusiastic banging of his spoon. Only Rebecca remained quiet, having nursed and fallen back to sleep in the cradle nearby. As the meal concluded and the children were settled for the night, Matthew reading a book in his room, Sarah and James already asleep, the adults sat around the fire with coffee. Dr. Harris shared news from town, including the upcoming Harvest Festival and plans for a proper schoolhouse to be built in the spring. "Your Matthew's about the right age to start formal schooling," the doctor noted. "Though I suspect he's already getting quite an education here. Hannah's been teaching him his letters and numbers," Kieran said proudly. "He's quick with figures, like his mother, and he has his father's way with horses," Hannah added. "But a proper school would be good for him. He needs to meet other children his age." "The ride to town would be long for a 6-year-old, Dr. Harris mused. "We've been discussing that," Kieran admitted, "thinking of building a small place in town, maybe above one of the shops. Hannah could use it for her sewing business when she goes in for orders, and during the school year, she and the younger children could stay there while Matthew attends school." "A townhouse and a ranch," Eli snorted. "Getting fancy in your old age, boss." Kieran grinned. "Just practical. The ranch is doing well enough to justify it." After the doctor had retired to the guest room and Eli to his own quarters, he'd finally agreed to move from the bunkhouse to a comfortable room off the kitchen 2 winters ago. Hannah and Kieran stood together on the porch, enjoying a moment of quiet. "Happy?" Kieran asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," Hannah replied, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life." "Having regrets about that 4th baby?" he teased gently. Rebecca had been unexpected, arriving when they'd thought their family complete with 3 children. "Never," Hannah said firmly, "though I think 4 is quite enough, don't you?" "More than I ever dreamed of having," Kieran admitted. "When I think of how close I came to missing all this." He shook his head. "If I hadn't gone to town that day, if I hadn't seen you there." "But you did," Hannah reminded him. "You saw me when no one else did." You gave everything you had without knowing if it would be worth it. Best investment I ever made, Kieran said, turning her to face him. His eyes, still as blue and kind as the day they'd met, searched hers. I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Every dollar, every struggle, every moment of uncertainty to end up here. With you, with our children. Hannah reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that time and laughter had etched around his eyes. From the moment you delivered Matthew, I knew you were a man I could trust. I just never imagined how much more you would become to me. And what's that? He asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Everything, Hannah answered simply. My husband, my partner, my best friend, the father of my children. My home. Kieran bent to kiss her. A kiss still filled with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their relationship from the beginning. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Hannah Young. More today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow. And I love you, she replied, always and forever. As they stood together in the cool autumn night, the Triple Y Ranch quiet around them except for the gentle sounds of the horses in the pasture and the wind in the cottonwoods, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate young widow on an auction block to the confident woman she was now, from the solitary rancher with nothing but dreams to the loving father and successful businessman Kieran, their paths had crossed in the most unlikely way, but had joined to create a life more beautiful than either could have imagined alone. Inside the house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge they were deeply loved. Outside, the stars shone down on the home they had built together, not just of wood and stone, but of sacrifice, courage, and unwavering love, a love that had begun in the most desperate of circumstances, but had grown to encompass a world of joy, hope, and endless possibility. The end.